The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, crisp and official, bearing the seal of Henderson and Associates, a law firm I'd never heard of in a town I'd never visited. My coffee grew cold as I read the words that would change everything. We regret to inform you of the passing of your great-aunt Cordelia Blackthorne. As per her last will and testament, you are the sole inheritor of her estate, including all properties therein. Cordelia Blackthorne. The name stirred vague childhood memories, whispered conversations between my parents, quickly hushed when I entered the room. The eccentric relative who sent peculiar birthday cards with no return address, always signed with an elaborate CB in violet ink. I'd assumed she was a figment of family folklore, another colorful character in our genealogical tapestry. But here was proof of her existence, and more importantly, proof that she'd left me something substantial. The letter mentioned Ravenscroft Estate in Millbrook Valley, Oregon, a place that sounded like it belonged in a Gothic novel rather than the Pacific Northwest. 3 weeks later, I found myself driving through the winding roads of Millbrook Valley, my Honda Civic groaning up steep inclines flanked by towering Douglas firs. The GPS had given up an hour ago, leaving me to navigate by the hand-drawn map the lawyer had provided. Turn left at the lightning-struck oak, one instruction read. Continue past the stone bridge until you see the iron gates. When I finally found the gates, my breath caught in my throat. They were magnificent. Wrought iron twisted into intricate patterns of ravens and thorns, standing at least 12 feet tall. But they were also locked, secured with a chain that looked older than I was. A small placard beside them read, Ravenscroft Estate, private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. I fumbled with the keys the lawyer had given me, my hands, trembling with anticipation and exhaustion. The lock clicked open with surprising ease, as if it had been waiting for this moment. The gate swung inward with a theatrical creak that made me half expect to see a horror movie camera crew emerge from the trees. The driveway stretched ahead, disappearing around a bend lined with ancient oak trees whose branches formed a natural cathedral overhead. Spanish moss, unusual for Oregon, draped from the limbs like tattered curtains, creating an otherworldly atmosphere that made the hair on my neck stand up. As I drove deeper into the property, the trees began to thin, revealing glimpses of something extraordinary. At first, I thought my eyes were deceiving me. But no, there it was, exactly as impossible as it seemed. A moat. An actual, honest-to-goodness moat, complete with dark water that reflected the cloudy sky like black glass. The driveway curved around the water, and I got my first full view of Ravenscroft Estate. The house, if such a modest term could describe it, was a masterpiece of Gothic Revival architecture. 3 stories of dark stone rose from an island in the center of the moat, connected to the mainland by a single stone bridge. Pointed arch windows stared down like knowing eyes, and gargoyles perched on the corners of the roof as if ready to take flight. But it was the bridge that truly took my breath away. Constructed of the same dark stone as the house, it arched gracefully over the water, wide enough for a car but clearly designed in an era when carriages were the primary mode of transportation. At its peak stood an ornate gatehouse, complete, with a portcullis that hung like the teeth of some medieval beast. I parked at the bridge's entrance, my hands shaking as I turned off the engine. The silence was profound. No traffic, no neighbors, just the whisper of wind through the trees and the gentle lapping of water against stone. For the first time in my 32 years, I owned something magnificent. Walking to the edge of the moat, I peered into the dark water. It was deeper than I'd expected, and remarkably clear despite its black appearance. I could see the carefully laid stones of the moat's construction, and something else, shapes moving in the depths. Fish, probably, though they seemed unusually large. The bridge felt solid beneath my feet as I crossed it, each step echoing off the stone walls of the gatehouse. The portcullis was raised, held in place by chains that looked recently oiled and maintained. Someone had been caring for this place, keeping it in perfect condition despite my great-aunt's passing. The front door of the house was a masterwork of carved oak, set with iron hinges that could have been forged in a medieval smithy. The key turned smoothly, and the door opened onto a foyer that belonged in a museum. A grand staircase swept upward, its banister carved with the same raven and thorn motifs that decorated the gates. Stained glass windows cast jeweled light across Persian rugs that must have cost more than my annual salary. I spent the rest of that first day exploring, each room revealing new wonders. The library contained thousands of volumes, many in languages I couldn't identify. The dining room boasted a table that could seat 20, set with china that looked like it belonged to European royalty. The kitchen was a fascinating blend of modern conveniences hidden within period-appropriate cabinetry, a clear sign that Cordelia had valued both authenticity and comfort. But it was the study that truly captured my imagination. Located in the house's highest tower, it offered a panoramic view of the entire estate. From here, I could see the full extent of the moat. It formed a perfect circle around the house, fed by a stream that emerged from the forest and disappeared into an underground channel. The property itself stretched for what looked like hundreds of acres, all of it surrounded by a stone wall that disappeared into the trees. On the desk, I found a leather-bound journal with my name written on the cover in that familiar violet ink. Inside, Cordelia's elegant handwriting told the story of our family's connection to this place. "Dearest Sarah," it began, "if you are reading this, then the time has come for Ravenscroft to pass to a new generation. Our family has been guardians of this land for over 2 centuries, keeping its secrets safe from those who would exploit them. The moat is not merely decorative. It serves a purpose that you will understand in time. The gates are not just for privacy. They are the first line of defense against those who would take what is not theirs." I read late into the night, learning about the peculiar history of our family and this remarkable estate. Cordelia wrote of neighbors who had coveted the land, of developers who had tried to force sales, of government officials who had attempted to claim the property through eminent domain. All had been turned away by the estate's unique defenses and the iron will of its owners. "The Hendersons," she wrote in one particularly intriguing passage, "have been circling like vultures for 3 generations. They own most of the valley now, but Ravenscroft remains beyond their reach. They believe that wealth and political connections can overcome any obstacle, but they have never faced the true power of this place." As I closed the journal and prepared for bed in the master suite, a room that would have made a king envious, I felt a deep sense of belonging that I'd never experienced before. This wasn't just a house, it was a fortress, a sanctuary, a place where I could finally put down roots and build something lasting. I fell asleep to the sound of water lapping against stone, unaware that my arrival had not gone unnoticed. The forest beyond the estate's walls, security cameras hidden in the trees, had captured every moment of my exploration. Miles away, in a glass tower that overlooked the valley, important people were making important decisions about my future. The Hendersons had been waiting for Cordelia to die for 30 years. They had plans for Ravenscroft Estate, plans that involved bulldozers and shopping centers and profit margins that would make shareholders very happy. They had lawyers and judges and politicians in their pockets, all ready to help them claim what they believed was rightfully theirs. But they had never met Sarah Blackthorne, and they had no idea what they were truly up against. The moat and the gates were just the beginning of Ravenscroft's defenses, and I was about to learn that some inheritances come with responsibilities that go far beyond simple ownership. The morning would bring visitors, and with them, the first real test of whether I was worthy of the trust Cordelia had placed in me. The battle for Ravenscroft Estate was about to begin, and I was the only thing standing between my family's legacy and those who would destroy it for profit. As I drifted off to sleep in my ancestral home, I had no idea that my quiet life was about to become anything but quiet. The moat reflected the stars like a dark mirror, keeping its secrets for one more night. But tomorrow, everything would change. I woke to the sound of engines, multiple engines, their mechanical growls cutting through the morning mist like chainsaws through silk. From my bedroom window, I could see a convoy of black SUVs parked beyond the iron gates, their occupants already spilling out onto the gravel road. Men in expensive suits mingled with others in hard hats and fluorescent vests, all gesturing animatedly at my property as if they were already planning its demolition. The sight sent ice through my veins. I'd been at Ravenscroft for exactly 12 Hours, and already the vultures had arrived. I dressed quickly and made my way to the bridge, my footsteps echoing off the stone walls of the gatehouse. Through the ornate ironwork of the gates, I could see them more clearly now, at least a dozen people, led by a silver-haired man whose bearing screamed authority and entitlement. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, surveying my estate like a general planning a siege. "Ms. Blackthorne," he called out as I approached. His voice carried the practiced charm of someone accustomed to getting his way. "William Henderson, Henderson Development Corporation. I believe we need to talk." I stopped just inside the gates, close enough to speak, but far enough to maintain the symbolic barrier between us. "Mr. Henderson, I wasn't expecting visitors." His smile was all teeth and no warmth. "I'm sure you weren't. But when we heard about poor Cordelia's passing and your unexpected inheritance, well, we felt it was important to reach out immediately. There are certain realities about this property that you need to understand." "Such as?" Henderson gestured to the man beside him, younger but with the same predatory gleam in his eyes. "This is my son, Marcus, our head of acquisitions. Marcus, why don't you explain the situation to Ms. Blackthorne?" Marcus stepped forward, pulling out a tablet and swiping through what looked like legal documents. "Ms. Blackthorne, I'm afraid there are some irregularities with your inheritance. Our research indicates that this property was never properly registered with the county. In fact, according to our records, this land has been classified as abandoned for the past 15 years. The audacity took my breath away. Abandoned? I'm standing on it right now." "Your great-aunt was quite elderly," William Henderson interjected, smoothly. "It's possible she wasn't entirely clear about the legal status of her holdings. We've already filed preliminary paperwork with the county to claim this land under adverse possession statutes. Oregon law is quite clear about abandoned properties." I felt anger rising in my chest like a tide. This property has been maintained continuously. Someone's been caring for it. "Can you prove that?" Marcus's tone was challenging. "Can you show us receipts for maintenance, utility bills, property tax payments for the past decade?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I realized I had no idea how Cordelia had managed the estate's affairs. The lawyer had simply handed me keys and told me the property was mine. I'd been so overwhelmed by the inheritance that I hadn't thought to ask about the practical details. The estate is still being settled," I managed weakly. "Of course it is." William's smile widened. "Which is why we're here to help. Henderson Development is prepared to offer you a very generous settlement, enough to set you up comfortably, anywhere you'd like to live. All you have to do is sign a few papers and this whole mess disappears." "What kind of settlement?" Marcus consulted his tablet again. "Given the questionable legal status and the significant costs associated with bringing this property up to code, we're prepared to offer $50,000. I nearly laughed. Even without knowing the estate's exact value, I could see it. Was worth millions. The craftsmanship of the house alone represented a fortune, and I had hundreds of acres of prime Oregon real estate. That's insulting. It's realistic, William countered. This place is a money pit, Ms. Blackthorne. Do you have any idea what it costs to maintain a moat? The insurance liability alone would bankrupt most people, and then there are the environmental concerns. That water hasn't been tested for contamination in decades. As if summoned by his words, something moved in the moat behind me. I heard the splash but didn't turn around, not wanting to show any sign of uncertainty. But I caught the way several of the men beyond the gates suddenly looked nervous. "What was that?" one of the hard-hatted men asked. "Probably just a fish," Marcus said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. The splash came again, bigger this time, followed by what sounded almost like a low growl. Every person outside the gates took a step backward, and I realized that whatever lived in the moat was larger than any ordinary fish. "The offer stands," William said, his composure beginning to crack. "But it won't stand forever. We have deadlines to meet, investors to satisfy. If you won't be reasonable, we'll have to pursue other options." "Such as?" "The county commissioner is a personal friend of mine. So is the judge who handles property disputes. I'm sure they'll be very interested to hear about the safety hazards this place presents, the structural integrity of that bridge, the environmental impact of an unregulated water feature, the fire dangers of a building with no modern safety systems. The threat was clear, but something had changed in me. Standing there on my own land with the weight of generations of blackthorns behind me, I felt a strength I'd never known I possessed. "Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins, "I think you should leave." His mask of civility finally slipped. "Don't be naive, girl. You have no idea what you're up against. We've been acquiring properties in this valley for 30 years. We own everything from here to the coast. This little fairy tale castle of yours is the last piece of the puzzle, and we will have it." "No," I said simply. "You won't." That's when Marcus made his first real mistake. He grabbed the iron gates and began to shake them, testing their strength. "These gates won't keep us out forever. There are legal ways to force entry onto abandoned property." The moment his hands touched the iron, everything changed. The water in the moat began to churn, as if something massive was stirring in its depths. The sound grew louder. Not just splashing now, but something that could only be described as singing. A low, haunting melody that seemed to come from the water itself. "What the hell?" Marcus started to say, but his words were cut off as something erupted from the moat. I'd been expecting a large fish, maybe a beaver or a river otter. What I saw defied every law of biology I'd ever learned. The creature that emerged was easily 12 feet long, with iridescent scales that shifted from deep green to midnight blue. Its head was serpentine but intelligent, with eyes that gleamed like emeralds. Most impossibly of all, it moved through the air as easily as it did through water, supported by fins that had evolved into something resembling wings. The dragon, for what else could I call it, hovered above the moat for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. Then it turned those ancient, knowing eyes toward the gates and released a sound that was part roar, part song, and entirely otherworldly. The men outside the gates scattered like leaves in a hurricane. Marcus stumbled backward so quickly that he fell, his tablet clattering across the gravel. William Henderson, to his credit, held his ground for a few seconds longer, but even he eventually retreated to the safety of the SUVs. The dragon settled back into the water with barely a ripple, as if the entire display had been as natural as breathing. In the sudden silence, I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. "This isn't over!" William shouted from behind the bulletproof glass of his vehicle. "You can't hide behind parlor tricks forever." The convoy departed in a cloud of dust and wounded pride, leaving me alone with the impossible creature that had just defended my property. I sank to my knees on the bridge, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what I'd just witnessed. That's when I heard the voice, not spoken aloud, but somehow communicated directly into my mind. "Welcome home, Guardian." I looked up to find the dragon, floating just beneath the surface of the moat, its great head barely breaking the water. Up close, I could see the intelligence in those emerald eyes, the ancient wisdom that spoke of centuries, perhaps millennia, of existence. "You can speak," I whispered. "I am Nerida, last of my kind, bound to this place by oaths older than your civilization. Your bloodline has protected my sanctuary for 7 generations. I have been waiting for you. My great-aunt knew about you. Cordelia was a worthy guardian. She kept the old agreements, maintained the barriers, and fed me stories of the changing world beyond these walls. But she was old, and her time was ending. The responsibility passes to you now." I thought of the journal, of Cordelia's cryptic references to the estate's defenses. The Hendersons, they'll be back. They will. They have been testing the boundaries for decades, growing bolder with each generation. They believe that money and influence can overcome any obstacle. They do not understand that some things are beyond their reach. But for how long? They have lawyers, judges, politicians, and you have me. But more than that, you have the right of blood and the power of the ancient compact. This land is not merely your inheritance, it is your sacred trust. The moat is not decoration, It is a barrier between two worlds. The gates are not merely iron, they are sealed with promises that predate any human law. As if responding to Narita's words, I felt something shift within me.